Hey, welcome. We're at the top of the hour, so I'll kick us off now. We are here to welcome you today. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to be with y'all today, and I will introduce myself and then we'll get started. My name is Robin Ellis. I am a program officer at the Crimson Bridge Foundation, and I am also one of the co-chairs of the Postsecondary Access and Attainment Impact Group, which is a group of about 200 post-secondary funders, local, regionally, place-based, national funders across the country who are members of Grantmakers for Education and who have worked hard to develop a webinar series this year called Post-Secondary Spotlights. We're really excited about this top issue today, and I'm so excited to welcome this powerhouse of panelists, and we'll turn it over right now. Carolyn Lee from Ascendium, can you get us started, please?
Thanks so much, Robin. Yeah, it's so great to be with everyone today. My name is Carolyn Lee. I'm a Deputy Director for Education Grantmaking with Ascendium Education Group. We are a national post-secondary education and workforce training focused funder, a member of Grantmakers for Education, member of PSA2, and just really thrilled to be able to be in conversation today with the broader Grantmakers for Education community and with a number of our grant partners, our trusted friends, who are doing such innovative and important work around post-secondary workforce training. So really excited to have the opportunity to be here. Would welcome folks to introduce yourself in the chat. Our conversation today is going to begin with just a very little bit of context setting by me. Then we're going to move into the panel discussion, which is why we're here, and have time at the end for some Q&A. So also be thinking of any questions you would like to put in the chat for the panelists to answer as we go through the conversation. So I wanted to just frame sort of why we're here today very briefly before we dive into the conversation with the panelists and give them the floor and the mic. We're joined today by this really esteemed panel of national experts, which includes leaders of best-in-class nonprofit workforce training organizations and an experienced researcher in the field who will all discuss with us the continued growth and impact of short-term sectoral training programs and what it means for traditional higher education. This is a conversation that, in my opinion, as one of the folks who was involved in organizing this session, deserves more attention from post-secondary education leaders and funders, and especially those who are concerned with lifelong learning, seamless pathways, and equitable economic futures. So, a little bit of background. In the past couple of years, Ascendium has invested more than $25 million in best-in-class nonprofit workforce training providers. Our commitment reflects a recognition of the growing importance and relevance, and frankly, the growing performance of these high quality nonprofit short-term training programs as pathways to economic mobility for learners from low-income backgrounds in particular, which is the population of learners that Ascendium exists to serve. If one of post-secondary education's primary value propositions is as a key to unlocking a family-sustaining career, then these effective training models really must also be considered on the basis of their impact on economic mobility for folks who are interested in high-quality post-secondary pathways. So Ascendium is sort of in using this platform to invite our colleague funders in higher education to engage in candid conversations with these partners today about key areas of connection, collaboration, and even perceived competition, if it exists, and sort of what the growth of high quality sectoral training means for the post-secondary sector. As always, we absolutely acknowledge the nuance in the conversation, that these are never easy or black and white conversations, one or the other. Community colleges in particular, of course, also offer short-term workforce training programs often on the non-credit side of the house, as we say. Community college career training programs are related, but maybe in many ways distinct models of short-term workforce training from the nonprofit organizations focused on our conversation today. Lines may become increasingly blurred between these kinds of program providers. And today we're really hoping to use this time to expose some false dichotomies that may exist. Partnerships already do exist between community colleges and short-term training providers, nonprofit providers. And of course, the existing structure and scale of community colleges across the country is a strong argument for ensuring that there are partnerships and that the offerings from community colleges are really informed by evidence, even evidence that has been generated about their well-evaluated cousins, these, sort of high-quality nonprofit training providers. An interesting question about sort of who functions as the front door for learners arises when we have these conversations. And I think lots of other really interesting questions will raise through this conversation. And of course, the last thing I will just say as a framing comment is that not all workforce training providers look the same. They each have their own approach, their own sort of key audiences. We're going to hear a lot more about that from our panelists today. There are a lot of distinctions among and between the various organizations and models and approaches. And we hope to use this conversation as an opportunity to build better understanding, build bridges, and make connections in this conversation that is sure to be ongoing. Hopefully really challenging some mental models today that this work exists in silos. And with that, I'd really like to stop talking now and officially welcome our VIPs to the conversation. So I'm going to call on each of our panelists and allow them and invite them to introduce themselves and their organization to us as a sort of overview for the group, and then we'll move into the actual sort of moderated conversation. So Noah, you're next to me on the screen, so I would invite you to go first. Noah Mitchell.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this platform and just for all the work that the union organization do. And I'm really excited about this time together. My name is Noah Mitchell, and I serve as the Deputy Chief Training Officer at Perscolis. For more than 25 years here at Perscolis, we have been in business. We're now in over 20 cities across the nation. At Perscolis, we are fully dedicated to providing free, high-quality technology training for individuals from unrepresented communities, helping them to launch successful careers in IT and beyond. In my role, I am charged with developing and implementing our strategy connected to our training initiatives. And I also help to coordinate our training programs, ensuring that we align with the needs of both our learners and the industry. But I want to take just 1 second to give a really quick story that I think really highlights the work that we do. When I first came to Perscolis, I had a learner who came to our organization. He was a single dad. He was making about $9 an hour. He took our 15-week program and got a job in the tech field where he was able to make a living making about $23 an hour. I'm telling you this story because it connects with what we're talking about today. About a month later, he messaged me and said, Noah, I need more. I want more. And he wanted to go back to college. And the importance of this conversation is that at that time, we did not have really robust connections and programming with community colleges where we didn't have an answer for him. And I'm glad that we have some answers now, and we'll get into some of those later. That was a teaser. I'm teasing this story. We're going to tease this story out as we go throughout this webinar, but want to just kind of give you that teaser as we go into that. I'll tell you more about this learner as we answer some of our questions here today.
Thank you so much, Noah. We're just going to keep moving along the screen, and I would love for Frida Molina now, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to participate on the panel today. As the lone researcher on the panel, I've had the opportunity to work with many of the providers that you'll hear from today, and it's been really a pleasure to be among this esteemed group of providers. So at MDRC, I am the director of MDRC's policy area called Economic Mobility, Housing, and Communities. And for over 10 years, we have been involved with evaluating both publicly funded and privately funded sectoral programs, and have learned a lot about the operations of those programs and also the promise of those programs. So I'm really looking forward to sharing some of that knowledge with you today. So thank you.
Glad to have you here. Thanks so much, Frida. Next on the list, Rebecca Tabor-Stalen with Merit America. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca, co-founder and co-CEO of the nonprofit Merit America. And I actually also wanted to share a quick story to introduce our work. So this exact month, 12 years ago, I was on a roadshow with the governor of Delaware. I was his policy advisor to share our higher education agenda for the state. And we had done tons of these roadshows, but I remember one in particular. Someone raised their hand and asked, "What are you doing about the fact that only 1 in 10 low-income students is earning a college degree by their late 20s, and the majority are getting stuck in low-wage work, often with debt and no degree?" So he threw that question out there, and I looked at the governor, and he looked at me, and I took it. We had a talking point. We'd practiced before, and said, "Well, we're excited to tell you about the major investments we're making in early childhood education for their kids." And I remember that because I had a pit in my stomach, because like so much of our system, the truth was we didn't have an answer for what we were doing once folks had been failed by higher education and were hitting the low-wage workforce. And so we co-founded Merit America to build a new mainstream pathway to the middle class that's designed for the 53 million Americans who are stuck in low-wage work and meets them where they are. Folks like a learner, Jaron, who also came to mind when I was thinking of this panel, who was working full-time as a security guard when he joined our program, making minimum wage or much less, couldn't support his family, and shared with me that he really hated the term college dropout because he didn't feel like he dropped out of college because he couldn't cut it. He felt like he made an educated decision that the time and money he was spending in college would not be the best path to get him to where he wanted to go. And so at Merit, we've helped over 11,000 learners like Jaron nearly double their salaries. Can share more about the exciting research work we've done with MDRC and others. And thanks to many of you on this call, we're on a path to reaching hundreds of thousands of learners directly, while also helping to shape the broader system so that it works for people who are stuck in low-wage work. So excited to share more about what we're learning.
Thanks, Rebecca. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Garrett Warfield with Year Up. Welcome.
Thanks, friends. Good to see you all. I'm glad to be with this group today. My name's Garrett. I have had the pleasure of being Europe's chief research and social impact nerd for the last 10 plus years. Since we were founded over 2 decades ago, Europe has served over 45,000 young adults, mostly ages 18 to 29, with a high school diploma or a GED, but without a bachelor's degree, in skills training, supports, work-based learning experiences, especially internships, and then job placements with over 250 of the country's largest employers in over 20 different cities. The approach that we've taken has proven to be really effective at promoting economic mobility. Several of our large-scale evaluations have demonstrated that we produce really large earnings gains for our graduates and a significant rate of return for our employer partners. A dollar invested in Europe yields about a $2.50 return to the world. That means at scale, $100 million invested in Europe is close to a $250 million impact for society. And 15 years ago, we started to expand and scale our partnerships with community colleges, especially across the country, which is why we're really excited to be with this group here today. And additionally, we have a branch of our work that's really well positioned to work directly with employers to advance skills-first talent practices within and across companies nationwide. That's our Grads of Life consultant and advisory practice. Moving forward, we're exploring new program and partnership constellation models to reach and connect to a larger number of young adults and bridge them to meaningful career opportunities. Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate all of you sharing in your own words a little bit more about your organizations, and looking forward to hearing more as we go forward. So I'm going to moderate, sort of begin with a couple of prompts and call on panelists individually to begin responding, but during our prep, I said, please, like, even though maybe this will be a question for Garrett, like, everyone jump in and make this a conversation if you have things that you'd like to add to any of these prompts. So looking forward to walking through some of these questions. And again, folks on the call, please feel free to put your questions into the chat as this goes on. So the first question is, in fact, going to be for Garrett as a starting point. What would you say, are there systemic and sustainable partnership models between colleges and career training or sectoral training organizations? What's possible in this space of collaboration and what is challenging?
Thanks very much. Honestly, I think there's massive potential and we've really just started to scratch the surface. And at the same time, I'll own a little bit more of what I said in the intro, which is Europe launched its college embedded program model in 2010. So we've been working on this kind of bridge between community college settings, especially some state colleges, and a training provider like Europe for a long time. We've served over 16,000 young people through that program model, through partnerships right now with over 18 different community colleges and in over 20 different cities. So we've had a really good go at this. Some of the things that have really worked well and I think deserve more exploration for the realm of what's possible. I mean, hands down, community colleges are the largest system serving opportunity talent. They are a bridge to the young adults who we're trying to serve conventionally through Year Up in our standalone model. There's a massive potential to align financial aid and Pell funding, especially to support credit-bearing work-based learning experiences in-house within colleges. And to bolster career services, not only for current students, but those who are emerging with associate's degrees and other certificates. That's one area that we're exploring with diligence moving forward, especially is to be that bridge to opportunity between completing an educational pathway and making that link to an actual work experience beyond some career coaching support and services that can be helpful, but isn't always sufficient to help at least the target population of young adults we're working with make that leap into a career pathway. Some things that have been challenging over time, I think in particular, aligning a training provider's curriculum to a community college's schedule or to the actual coursework and the requisite curricula within a college setting can be challenging, and wanting to stay apprised and abreast of the latest and greatest demands from the market, what employers are asking for. That translation work isn't easy. That's something we've become very good at over time, but the speed at which employer demand might change, different roles requiring different sets of skills translates into a higher ed setting, can sometimes be on different cadences. And we've had to wrestle with that over time, wanting to, for example, iterate a curriculum over the course of 3 months, but could have implications for students who are currently enrolled or expected to enroll in those similar classes for the next semester or two. That has repercussions for planning internally. I'd also say there are some additional data sharing challenges that are particularly important. Learning how and where and when to track who's participating in work-based learning experiences, which college classes are earning credits, and actually moving someone closer to fitting that employer's need is also really important. And then, of course, what happens to a young adult after they transition into that employment opportunity over a longer period of time within that employer, sharing back to the college or to the training provider of like Year Up, what's happened in the long run is especially important. Those are just a few examples. I don't want to go on too long, Carolyn, but we can dig in further if need be.
No, it's great. It's a great place to start. And I'd welcome Rebecca or Noah in particular, if there's anything else you'd like to share about the ways that you all know how these collaborations work, or the ways that you're exploring how to collaborate more.
Yeah, happy to jump in. We are really excited by a model that we're working on with a major community college partner in Texas now, whereby it's really the best of all worlds. They've spent time working on an incredible curriculum, but their curriculum is currently being delivered via a full-time program that is reaching fewer than 100 folks a year in person for folks who are unemployed and mostly people who are, just graduating high school and going. So they say, okay, we've got this great curriculum, but our target audience for it is this, really small, local, can dedicate themselves to full-time learning. At Merit America, the problem, again, that we're solving is designing for low-wage workers and designing at scale. And so we came to them and said, hey, we would love to partner to offer this advanced manufacturing track at scale. And what we can offer is we can recruit folks who are stuck in low-wage work. We can support them in making the learning work with their schedule. That's a big secret sauce, is our coaching program and how that works. And then get them into careers. And it won't at all be competitive because we're targeting a totally different learner type, both where you are, but you're not currently serving them, and hopefully across the country. And I give this example because I think it'd be really easy to look and be like, well, we're offering advanced manufacturing. Why do we need a partner to help us offer more advanced manufacturing? But so much of this lives in the details of who are we targeting? How are we serving them? Are we really backwards designing to meet both the needs of the employers and the needs of different types of learners who are desperately in need of this opportunity? And when you're willing to go to that next level of detail, so much is possible.
I want to jump in here because I think this description that Rebecca just provided is a really important one to understand, this role of this intermediary role that these providers play, because many of these providers are actually partnering with community colleges where the colleges are offering the training, but it's this positioning between understanding employers' needs and skill sets, understanding job seekers, and helping the colleges to be more responsive to the needs of employers by helping them think about the curricula, and also by recruiting individuals that they don't necessarily spend time recruiting because they don't need to usually. So it's this function, I think, is a really important one to highlight, particularly in the relationship between these providers and higher education institutions.
Just to kind of round us out here, I think that, we've gotten some really good models here, kind of represented, whether it's integrated curriculum or dual enrollment. I think that these are opportunities for us, but I think all these models really hinge on buy-in from all stakeholders. I think that's really important. Educators, industry leaders, funders, policymakers, all need to be invested in these programs in a way that really helps the outcomes of our learners for the broader community. There's a question in the chat about how do we do that sort of, are there specific industries that we do that? I'll speak specifically to the tech industry. The reality is that the tech industry is changing so quickly. A 4-year degree where the curriculum was created 2 years prior to that, there's just not a way to keep up with the need. And so we have to be really intentional about making sure that all stakeholders understand this and are willing to dive into that. I want to say something really quick about funders part in this. They play a pivotal role. Obviously, in this ecosystem, we can't do anything without the dollars, right? But it's not just about the financial support. They also broker collaboration, joint projects, invest in research that help us to identify best practices. These are really important nooks in the system that we have to be aligned on in order for us to really make these different programs work. And so I think that's really an important part of this as well.
Agreed, Noah, and we will definitely continue that thread throughout this conversation. What's the role for funders? What can funders be considering as this work grows, as these partnerships grow, as the need for high quality workforce training grows? I want to pivot to a question, and Noah, I'm going to come back to you on this one as a starting commenter. Who's being served by sectoral training programs, and what are their outcomes? How does that compare perhaps with outcomes for students in traditional post-secondary education programs? What is the student, what is the learner or the participant profile?
Yeah, so for us at Perscolas, we have kind of 4 different categories that when we're looking at our participants. They're usually career changers. There's someone who has been doing particular work in one industry and they're looking to change. Obviously, for us, that change is usually in IT. So they've been processing, they've been doing something, and now they want to change their career. It's also for working adults. Rebecca mentioned this earlier, this idea of our learners don't really have the ability to go to cut off their finances for 4 years to go to school, right? And so they're working adults. They're trying to figure out a way to supplement their knowledge while also keeping food on the table. And so that's a really important part of it. And then I think that Garrett mentioned this too, but recent grads or folks who are really sort of early in their work careers. When we're talking about outcomes, I mentioned this earlier, but one of the big outcomes for us is being able to shorten the runway from folks getting the education they need and then the jobs they need afterwards. And so we're taking curriculum and really putting it into an incubator to make that learning happen quickly and effectively. The second piece of that I mentioned earlier is that we're able to really lean on the industry to tell us what is it that's important for folks to be learning so that we can inform the curriculum in real time to make sure that we're producing learners who will be attractive to employers within the industry. And so that's really, really an important piece of it. Also, when we're thinking about outcomes, we've mentioned this a couple of times, where we're talking about increased earning potential, and this is something that's not just good for the learner, but it's good for the community, it's good for the family, it's good for us all when we're able to increase those earning potentials. And the last thing I'll say on this is, when we're thinking about our program, we're always processing how do we provide hands-on experience that gives our learners a step forward to be able to be job ready as soon as they graduate. What are the ways that we can put some practical essence to the training so that they're viable when they graduate? And so I think these are the folks that we're targeting, the folks that are coming through our programs, and then some of the ways and the outputs that we see coming through.
Anyone else want to jump in and talk a little bit about who are the students or the learners being served by your programs?
I'll hop in briefly to share and riff off of what Noah was saying. Europe focuses primarily on very, very early career stage young adults. Typically, our students are working adults, but they're usually in jobs that might help them put together some form of earnings, but not what they need to sustain in the long run. The vast majority of students have tried some form of post-secondary schooling or training, usually a conventional higher ed pathway, but have weaved in and out of that system and ultimately landed back at Europe because, like we were saying earlier, deferring the earnings potential over an extended period of time is just too high of an opportunity cost. And what this ultimately means demographically is that the vast majority of Europe participants are students of color. Many are coming in as first-gen college students if they've tried any college at all. More than half have at least tried some college classwork. Again, they don't have 4-year degrees. And importantly, we're serving a group of folks who financially need a job sooner than later. And in addition, are interested in what we're training in and what we have to offer. Our program works best when the prospective students who are coming into the model want to aim for a workforce outcome primarily because they need that financial sustainability and earnings most proximately, and then can pursue lifelong learning over a longer period of time, ongoing certs, creds, and so forth. But that financial stability in the short term tends to be a key characteristic of who ends up enrolling in our program.
Welcome any other comments if anyone wants to make them, but I think those are definitely at least partially representative of some of the characteristics of folks who might be being well served by sectoral training programs. Yeah. Oh, Frida, would you like to?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, all right. My next question is actually for Rebecca, and I'd love to turn to you to talk a little bit about in the spirit of myth busting, what assumptions do we need to challenge today? One we've already touched on perhaps is the idea that college and workforce training organizations are only in competition with one another, when in fact there's lots of great examples of complementary and collaborative programs. But what else might you offer as a myth that needs busting?
Yeah, well, when I saw this, I immediately thought of a dinner I had not long ago with a very close friend who has a PhD. She's an academic leading financial economic research. And I was telling her how jazzed I was because all the pieces were coming together we've got this partnership with Amazon to prepare low-wage workers at scale. We've got curriculum partnerships for advanced manufacturing and all these tech roles. We've got all these employers and like, we're going to build this new pathway. We're going to keep building this new pathway. And she said, I just wonder, are there really enough people working at Amazon who are capable of these roles? And I remember feeling such a gut punch, like, oh my God, I have not done my job as her friend over the years. But I think that is a myth in two ways. There are two pieces I want to unpack. One is that like the people we're talking about are diamonds in the rough, that you've got these 53 million low-wage workers who are in low-wage work because they've made bad decisions, they haven't worked hard. And like there are a couple who are really great who we need a pathway for. And I can tell this group unequivocally, like it's all diamonds. Folks who are in low-wage work are predominantly there because they have been failed by our higher education system, not because they have failed. And so we've worked with over 2,000 Amazon fulfillment center workers as an example, and could work with tens of thousands more just within Amazon. There's so much talent sitting there. So we have no problem, and I'd love to bust that myth that there's not a ton of talent stuck in the low-wage workforce. The second is, in that comment, are they capable of getting these jobs? This idea that somehow like the learning and the skills are too hard for someone to learn while they work or to learn later in life. And these jobs require something that we can't train for. Again, we've worked with hundreds of employers. We've placed thousands and thousands of learners. And I can say these jobs that pay a living wage, that have upward mobility, that are recession resilient, that have great benefits, like the jobs that we want folks in are attainable. You can't necessarily get them without any preparation, but it is possible that with a program that is a few hundred hours spread out over a couple months, you can really get someone ready and moved, as our UVA partnership has shown, from making $25,000 a year to over $50,000 on average with just a few months. So that's probably the biggest myth I would want to bust. Because I have the mic, just the quick secondary myth related to that is that somehow our space is very crowded. I hear people all the time, friends from Europe and Perscolis, I don't know if you hear the same, being like, oh, like there's so many of you doing this. I don't know who to bet on, how to make it work. We are talking about a 53 million person problem that touches pretty much every aspect of society. It touches income inequality, whether the American dream is possible. It touches K-12 education, because if you care about K-12 education, these are the parents of the students who can actually shift the trajectory for their kids. So it touches everything. And I think there are like a dozen really high quality providers tackling it, but you can support all of us. We don't feel like we're in competition with each other. We all have a different approach to scale, a slightly different population we work with. And so those are the myths I would most want to bust today and every day.
Rebecca coming in hot. I love it. You like that show Mythbusters. That was good. I want to just double click on something there. The idea that we're going to somehow run out of people, or that like we're just looking for these rare diamonds in the rough. To date, we've graduated more than 25,000 individuals in technology alone, right? 25,000. We're on pace to be serving about 10,000 learners a year by 2026. So this idea that we're just looking for a couple of diamonds in a rough, like that, they're out there. We have a lot of work to do. And so I think that that's a really big piece when we're thinking about busting the other myth that we've talked about, the dichotomy approach, which really kind of says it's one or the other. But the reality is that for us to fully serve the totality of individuals that we need to serve, the answer has to be both. The question about scale, which I think we'll get to, but we can't do these in bifurcated sections trying to combat the work. We have to do it together. The other myth I want to bust really quickly is this idea that education or learning is linear. It's not. It's not this direct line. You go to high school, you go to college, you do this, you get a job, and now education and learning is not this linear pathway. And so I think that when we really embrace that, it helps us to bust the dichotomy myth as well. That we've got to be working together to really solve this very complex and large problem.
I love all the comments so far. I'd add to it that there's this myth that if we build it, they will come. Importantly, from the student perspective, generating prospective students' interest in sectoral programs like ours can be costly and challenging. Opening minds to consider alternatives to higher ed pathways is a lot of work. For decades, secondary schools and families have been laser focused on college access and completion, and rightly so in many cases because of the promise it holds. But even if a conventional higher ed pathway isn't a good fit for that young adult or their family, changing those minds and perspectives, introducing alternatives requires building trust. In Year Up's experience, and maybe others here can relate to this, offering a free program that provides a financial stipend, internship opportunities, and proof of drastically increasing earnings after the program often sounds too good to be true. We have to earn students' trust that a program like ours has a place in the wider ecosystem of post-secondary pathways. And that takes time and significant investment and shouldn't be taken for granted.
Like, we'll keep busting myths as much of this call as we can. This is super. I mixed up the order of the two questions, so I'm going to come back to this one that I'm now putting on the screen. And we just talked about the myth busting, but going back to the previous bullet, Frida, I'd love to invite you to weigh in here. As you mentioned at the top of the call, you've worked with so many providers over the last 10 years, not to mention the ones on this call, but would you sort of help us understand what some of the key elements of an effective sectoral training program are? We've been talking about how important it is that the programs on this call are able to effectively serve their learners. So what does it take to do that?
Sure. And let me just give you a little bit of context about how these, what I think some of the distinguishing features are of these types of programs. And you've heard a little bit about this already. So one is that they're taking a dual customer approach. They see both the job seeker as well as the employer as being their customers, and being able to satisfy both is definitely part of their mission. And they're labor market driven. Or focus, which means that they're focusing on growth sectors in their regional economies that offer good jobs with room for advancement. And that's really critical. They're not just training for any sectors, for any jobs. They're really looking at this focus on what are jobs that are going to pay higher wages that have promise for advancement opportunities. And that by isolating one sector or a number of fewer sectors, they're then able to go deep and really build significant knowledge about those sectors, about the opportunities within in terms of career tracks, about the structure of the industry, about the skills that are required, about the trends and what the trends, industry trends means for the kind of changes they have to make to adapt to the labor market needs of employers. And through this knowledge that they gain from understanding the sectors that they're in, they become trusted sources of talent for these employers. So that's the backdrop of how they kind of do what part of their secret sauce, if you will. But then they combine that in terms of helping to prepare job seekers by kind of combining 5 to 7 different components. Many of them have upfront screening at entry. So they're really looking to make sure that the individual that's coming in to apply for their training is a good match for the industry in which they're training for. And that can include doing some type of academic assessments to make sure that individuals have the type of numeracy, literacy that's going to be required on the job. And then they're also providing, and you've heard this, short-term occupational skills training. Much of it is less than 1 year in duration. Many of it leads to industry recognized certificate, but the goal here is to provide training that is short-term and is able to give somebody a job at the end of it that provides, higher wages. In addition to the occupational skills training, they're also providing what I would call essential skills, 21st century skills. These are sometimes people call these soft skills. These are the kinds of behaviors, attitudes, and expectations of performance on the job that's really important for someone to succeed even after getting the training. So they're focusing on critical thinking skills, on problem solving, on communication skills, and so forth. They provide wraparound services and supports so that that helps to make sure that an individual's is able to complete. And that might be in the form of providing funds for tools, equipment, clothing on the job, or also helping to provide a referral for mental health counseling, or stepping in when someone has a crisis and helping to problem solve. And sometimes that means providing supports, financial supports to help them through that crisis. In the case of Europe and others, they provide also work-based learning. So the individuals are not only getting the technical skills, but they're also getting work experience while they're getting the training. And that makes them to be all the more prepared post training completion. The deep relationships that these organizations have with employers and the knowledge of the industry also means that they are very helpful on the job placement aspect of things. They are also helping to vouch for individuals with employers with whom they have close relationships, so that if an employer may not necessarily, you know, hire individuals that have non-traditional backgrounds, then these programs can vouch for those individuals, have them take a chance and see that they are actually very well prepared. And finally, many of these programs offer post-placement support. So not only helping them get a job, but making sure that they can maintain that job, and then also thinking and counseling them through advancement opportunities for the future.
Thanks so much for outlining all of that, Frida. And it leads me to my next question, which I would love for folks, anyone on the panel to sort of weigh in on, which is really all of these elements of a high quality program, or common elements across high quality programs. And we've been talking so far today about the scale of the need for shorter term upskilling and training that leads to economic mobility. So what will it take for high quality providers to reach the sort of scale to be able to actually be addressing the problem at scale, at the appropriate scale across the country? What's it going to take to do that? And what role might education funders have to play in supporting that? So this is an open call for responses across the panel. But Frida, if you'd like to jump in first and get us started, that'd be great.
Yeah, so one thing I would say is that in many respects, these programs are victims of their own success, right? Because we've learned from evaluations that we have found that these sectoral training programs can help increase individuals' employment and earnings in the short term, and then continue to grow those earnings over time in the long term. And so because we've found something that works and that is effective, then we all want more of them, right? But I think what is challenging is that the field really does not have a standard definition of what does it mean to scale. And at the core, obviously, scaling means, reaching more participants, but how you go about doing that can vary greatly. To show just some examples, and we've heard these from providers that we were able to bring to MDRC back in February, in which they said, some are scaling by adding new sectors. They may start in one sector and they may add another as a way to reach more people. Others are targeting new populations that they may not have targeted in the past. Some are trying to serve more people better so that the outcomes are better than what they had in the past. So maybe placing more people than they were able to place in the past, or serving more employers, or introducing different ways of training, maybe online training as a way of, getting more, helping more individuals, or or expanding to new markets in case of replication. And in one case, we heard providers saying, we're not replicating ourselves, but if others want to learn from us, we're more than happy to help others understand how we do our work so that they can replicate their own programs in their communities. So I think one thing we have to think about when we're talking about scaling is, what does it cost to scale? Oftentimes, I think there's pressure to scale at lower costs, because if we've proven that these organizations are effective, then just serving more people, they should be able to do it cheaper, right? But I think that we need to understand that we need to be patient, because scaling doesn't necessarily come at lower costs, at least not initially. And I think we need to think about what does it cost in terms of the infrastructure, both, new phone lines, new computer licenses, and so forth, but also additional staff. And what does that cost in terms of recruitment and training and so forth? So there's an infrastructure that's necessary to scale, and it doesn't often mean that it's going to be cheaper initially. So I think we need to think about being patient with providers, not expecting necessarily if they're serving more people, they're serving at a lower cost initially. And in some cases, we may need to think about treating expansion as a new startup or of a pilot, so that those programs can do what they do, and then over time maybe reduce their cost. And then finally, I think the field in general needs to document the approach and the lessons they learned from what does it take and the conditions and the supports necessary to go to scale. So those are just generally, I think, what we need to think about when we're wanting these programs to scale, and learn from those that have able to do that successfully.
Happy to jump in here too, and building on what Frida shared. We think about getting to scale in two big ways, both of which feed each other. One is, how do we directly scale programs that can directly help hundreds of thousands of people have transformative outcomes? I know when we talk about a 53 million person problem, a couple 100,000 folks might seem like a drop in the bucket, but that is just a massive number of people. When you look at the wage gains that we see for them, it would be putting tens of billions of dollars into the economy through the pockets of hardworking Americans. So we think that's really important. And in parallel to that work, shaping the system overall to have higher social ROI for folks, to make sure that, one, we have programs across the spectrum of the time and energy people have available to get them from place A to place B, and we're helping them navigate between them. Already today, we know that there are colleges at exactly the same price point that will have radically different outcomes, some of which completely get folks on a launch pad to lifelong success, and others which leave them with just debt and no degree, or a debt degree, but still stuck in low-wage work. And so how do we create these proof points at scale while also shaping a system to better recognize where is the impact happening, at what costs in terms of time and money, and how do we continually encourage folks to go to places above the line? One quick other thing I'll say, just from an operational perspective, we've always said at Merit, there are 4 things we need to get right to get to scale. It's been in our founding DNA. We are building for scale, so much so that in our earliest days, I've got a video of the 3-person team doing some manual task, and one of our teammates turns to me and goes, "Now this is not going to scale." It was just all we talked about all the time. And the 4 things we have to do is figure out how to recruit learners at scale. As Dr. Warfield said, that is a huge, you can't just build it and assume they will come. We're building partnerships with Lyft and other major gig work companies, with Amazon, to get big channels of low-wage workers into the program. We have to have a model that can scale, so not do something that is really impactful for 1,000 people, but couldn't possibly get to hundreds of thousands. Let's have a model that is designed for scale from the outset. We've got to nail employer placement at scale, which means we've learned coupling direct employer relationships with coaching that helps learners and graduates get the jobs that are right for them, even if we don't have a direct employer relationship. And then we need funding models that, again, can really get us to impacting hundreds of thousands of folks in a way that is sustainable for millions more. For us, we've created a learner pay it forward financing program that helps fuel our scale. We have been very grateful to have philanthropy to help catalyze our work, and we believe that philanthropy should not be the long-term funder for this. And ultimately, at scale, we need to be funded by a combination of earned revenue and public funding.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Others, Garrett, Noah, thoughts about, like, what does it take to get to scale? And if you'd like to respond to sort of the part B of that question, what is philanthropy's role in helping this sector scale?
I'm glad to hop in here, and I think it relates on both fronts, like you were saying, Carolyn, funders' role as well as what it takes to scale. We need employers to be at the table with us. And business as usual, Europe operates with very close partnerships with over 250 companies. We've worked with many of these organizations, with these employers for years, and have built that trust over time. Over that same period of time, I can say with confidence, in at least the decade I've been with Europe, a lot of our research and our measurement activity with the support of funders has rightly so focused on programs, how we operate, what our designs look like, and what the outcomes look like for participants. It's largely absent of a research agenda that includes bringing employers to the table to deeply understand what it would take to motivate them and demonstrate a rate of return that makes internships, apprenticeships, work-based learning experiences appetizing, profitable even, that it makes dollars and cents to do that kind of programming. In our experience, that's a critical bridge from getting someone out of classroom training, even if it's focused very targetedly on specific sectors or specific skills that are required in the job, even for coaching folks into roles. That kind of work-based learning experience is the critical bridge to getting folks who have a greater likelihood of converting into a full-time role after that experience, while providing the employer a chance to learn what it is to support someone who's coming from a different background from their conventional talent acquisition avenues, and prepare to bring that person in-house and have them be an FTE over time. I would invite anyone here who has those relationships with employers in different ways than Europe does to work together with us to bring them to the table, because this doesn't happen without both sides of the equation. I mean, we need talent and training to facilitate their connection, but this doesn't work without employer demand. On our end, we've been working hard in the last 18 months or so on a labor market insights capability that helps us look further out and anticipate and forecast when job demand is going up, down, changing, holding, plateauing across the variety of sectors we train in. Starting that planning sooner and looking further out slows time down. And that allows our employer partners to anticipate and incorporate us into their larger talent acquisition strategies over time, rather than, for example, reacting on a 3 to 6 month cadence, what jobs are available right now and need to be filled imminently. We can plan further ahead, and that is a critical component to us scaling, is anticipating where supply and demand systems meet over a longer period of time.
Noah, anything to add here, or we could turn to trying to get one or two questions from the audience. I can see the chat has been active. I have not been looking at it. I think Robin maybe has been keeping her eye on the chat, which I'm very appreciative of. Is there any, would you pick out one or two questions, Robin, that you'd like to propose that our panel respond to?
Yeah, I can tell some of them have been answered in the Q&A, so I will just try to skip around, and I'll say now that whatever we aren't able to answer today, we'll find a way to get you an answer, so no worries. I wanted to ask a couple, these are more logistical questions about the pathway. So are there particular career and academic fields that are especially targeted for these kinds of training models, at least for the 20 or so that are active and that we exist today? And are there programs that are targeted for, say, like single parents that don't have family community support networks or other populations?
That's a great question. Frida, I don't know, from your sort of bird's eye view, would you like to take that one?
Sure. So the most common industries are healthcare, manufacturing, IT, construction, and in some cases, finance.
And Robin, what was the second part of that question?
Are there programs that are targeted for like single parents? Any training programs?
Yeah, I can dive in there. We have a lot of single parents at Merit America. And again, I think what excites me so much is that dual generation impact of when you help single mother, one who comes to mind, her name was Janelle, had 6 children, housing insecure, not making a living wage, had more money in college debt than she was making annually. And through our program was able to get a great new career, tons of upward mobility, great salary, bought her first home, and the impact that has not just on that individual, but their family and their ability to be engaged in school, in everything that comes up. I think that's what gets us excited. I think I saw in the chat, like, are we measuring that? And at Merit, we do. We ask a lot about questions related to, your mindset shift. We use the Gallup World Happiness Poll questions, and we see a statistically significant increase in happiness and life satisfaction, folks who are coming off government benefits who might have been on them previously. So we do really enjoy seeing that impact and tracking it. In terms of how we best support them, a few things we've learned are just the need for that really thoughtful combination of flexibility and support. So how do we have programs that can meet someone where they are? If they've got a really tough week at work because they keep their jobs while they do our program, if they've got a sick kid, that it's not, that's it, you're out. Like we say, once you're in, how do we really support you in getting through this program? So give them that flexibility, but also make sure the structure is there so they don't feel like, oh, I can just, take a few months off and come back to it at any point. That there's a real balance between when you have hard deadlines, when you have soft deadlines, when you have requirements versus recommendations. So it's something we're constantly thinking about. And the last initiative I'll say I'm really excited about is creating community within our learners. At Merit America, we have affinity groups for all sorts of teammates. We're, over 200 people. And that's been game changing for people's feeling of connectivity to our organization. And so we're rolling out the same with our learners to have a single mothers affinity group where folks who are going through the Merit America program have a chance to actually connect with people who have the same motivations in the exact same circumstances, to share with us feedback on how we can better make our programs tailored to their needs, and to form the community that we know is so helpful in getting through a life-changing experience like this.
That's awesome. Robin, would you like to lift up maybe one more question with our last
Yes, I
few
think we have
minutes?
time for one more. I would
Yeah.
say, I heard Garrett mention developing or resourcing a research agenda. A question came in about how are you working with employers to address their biases and hire more learners. So kind of like how are beyond inviting employers in to work within the research agenda, how are you working with employers and how is that different across your organizations?
I appreciate you calling that one out. We had a little bit of a Q&A back and forth on the side here on this one. The first thing I want to call folks' attention to is Europe's honored to have a business vertical called Grads of Life that's been operating for well over 10 years at this point. And Grads of Life is primarily focused on perception, practice, and policy change specifically related to employers. When I started at Europe, we went live with our first public service campaign that made the point about just how much employers are missing by not opening up their talent acquisition pathways to opportunity talent who aren't coming from conventional backgrounds. And here we are 10 years later, and there's this thing, the skills first movement, which is really, really latched on, which is incredible. And also it's a great start, but not enough to remove degree requirements. There's so much more commitment that's required to really realize the full potential of those alternative talent acquisition pathways. So Grads of Life works directly with companies. We have a number of tools that are deployable in any employer context that focus on their skills first hiring, retention, and advancement practices and policies. We can measure those policies, measure which of them are realized in practice, how many talents are flowing into the organization, retained over time, and advanced into later career stage roles. And using that measurement, we can provide feedback to the company to adjust on where practices could be more supportive of those pathways into later career stages at their companies. And where there might still be blocks or challenges. I think one great example of this is in the removal of degree requirements. It leaves many of us wanting for some other proxy of knowing when someone is job ready now. And frankly, we see there is a gap and a need for a more comprehensive suite of job readiness, workplace and career readiness skills assessments that don't need to be put up as any kind of barrier or blockade to getting to that opportunity, but as a way to understand who right now is ready for this opportunity and who might need some more support from a program like Europe or our sibling programs here on the call.
Well, that is, I think, going to have to be a great way for us to leave this conversation. It has been such a robust and wide-ranging conversation. I really encourage any colleague funder on the call who wants to connect with Ascendium or with any of our colleagues here listed on this slide with their contact information to reach out to learn more. There's lots more to explore. This has really only been the start, scratching the surface of a conversation. And I just want to thank Rebecca, Garrett, Noah, Frida, and especially Robin for her help in organizing this session. It was really my pleasure to be in conversation with all of you today, and so thankful that you're here. And I think, Robin, you've got just a couple of closeout comments for us.
Yes, thank you so much, Carolyn. Thank you so much, panelists. We will have this recording available for you on the Grantmakers for Education website. Here's the QR code for you. If you're on the PSA2, the Postsecondary Impact Group listserv, you'll be receiving that as well in an email. You're welcome to sign up for updates with other ed funders. And if you want to advance to the next one, I'll just point out a few great programs that are coming up. These are a couple of, well, one virtual and then a couple of in person. We have a legacy sites study tour for Grantmakers for Education members coming up in Montgomery, Alabama on the end of July. And then we also have the early bird registration is opening for our fall 2024 Grantmakers for Education conference, which is happening this fall, October in Minneapolis. I will see you there. If you will be there, please join us at the post-secondary meetup. Myself, Jonathan Reed of ECMC, and Jenny Achilles at the Trellis Foundation, our co-chair group will be there. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.